For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Amy Fuller, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Accenture. On the show today, we talk about her scope of her role, which is massive, over 1,000 marketers across the world. And Accenture itself is 469,000 employees across 200 cities globally. What does the CMO role look like, and how do you tame that complexity when you're operating at that scope? We talk about what's important to her in her role as CMO and helping to define the issues the organization can take a stand on. We talk about the bridge building and collaboration that's necessary for CMOs in that new CMO role as a collaborator in chief, so to speak. And then we have a little fun at the end talking about her experiences in a almost desolate island and at an early age, and learning to be resilient and driving her spirit of innovation. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Amy Fuller. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be here.
Well, one thing I love to do is just to kind of go back a little bit and learn a little bit about your path and your background. So where did you start your career?
Well, and I will attempt to do the short and interesting version instead of the long, boring version. But
Sure.
I'm a huge fan of liberal arts education, and I graduated from Bryn Mawr College with a degree in French, not particularly useful, but it ended up being hired as assistant director of public information at the college where I'd been writing press releases. And it ended up being the ideal first job in terms of lots of responsibility and no resources, which is the definition of how you learn. And from there on to Madison Avenue about a year later, and spent 20 plus years running businesses at big ad agencies in New York, including Ogilvy and Y&R. Had a client-side stint at MasterCard running consumer marketing globally. Had a great stint at Deloitte Global running the brand globally, which led me pretty much to my current role, which I assumed about a year and a half ago at Accenture.
I got it. Well, I mean, going from liberal arts to agency to client side to consulting now, what was the motivation between the switches, at least between those three areas, if you don't mind?
Well, I can't pretend to have thought it out in advance. And
Right.
when I give people advice now, which I do a lot of, I always identify some threads that were very useful to me. And one was to always work with world-class brands. And so that thread of world-class brands has followed me my entire career. And it was by doing that I was able to pick up a lot of learnings about how you learn about consumer behavior, how you look at market research, how you make a big impact in the marketplace, and how you work globally.
Gotcha. Well, you are like your own Venn diagram, if you will, with the industry changing between marketing, advertising, and consultancies. How have these past experiences being in each of those business models, how have they taught you? What have they taught you, or how have you learned from those different types of experiences?
Well, Alan, I love the Venn diagram comparison. I have not heard that ever in my life.
Consulting.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. I feel like I need to draw it on a whiteboard somewhere. I will say that I feel spectacularly lucky. And again, not planned, but lucky in terms of how my career unfolded. And what I learned from the many, many, many years on the ad agency side running businesses was this idea of how to thrive with scarcity. So ad agencies are famous for never enough resources, never enough budget, never enough information, yet you need to make magic happen. And so that instills a lot of resiliency and a lot of can-do capabilities in terms of delivering despite the circumstances, which are invaluable skills. On the client side, what I learned was how to be slightly more greedy about the quality of business insight that any marketer is ever given. So understanding what you're actually trying to solve, not what you're being told to solve necessarily, but boring into the true business problem is the only way you can succeed in marketing. And what I found in my first client-side stint at MasterCard was that any question I had about any economic angle on the business problem was literally a phone call away. I could call the person in charge of the business and get the answer. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. And it's a lesson that has helped me for this sort of second half of my career, is making sure that you understand the right problem that you're solving. And doing that at a consulting organization is really, really useful, because having served clients for so many years on the ad agency side, I have never lost that sense of what that is like. And of course, the work I'm doing with my team now at Accenture is trying to equip the practitioners of our trade to do their very best in the marketplace. And so I don't know how I could do that without having had the 20 plus years on the ad agency side, where I was doing a similar task of connecting with clients, building credibility, having a good brand behind me that meant something to the clients that I was seeking and the clients I was handling. So I guess that's how I would describe my own Venn diagram.
I love it. I love it. Well, Accenture, you've got somewhere near, I think, 469,000 employees across 200 cities globally. And I believe, if I got my numbers right, that you're directing somewhere around 1,000 marketers across the company in your current role. That's a big scope. That's a huge scope. What are your secrets to managing at that level of scope and complexity?
Well, it's such a good question, Alan. And it is a highly complex organization. And I think most organizations these days have a matrix one way or another. So what I found, especially coming in from the outside, was building peer relationships and understanding, if not every detail of the business, understanding the primary levers of what matters to Accenture was absolutely fundamental. And then quickly diagnosing, okay, what needs to happen? Moving forward, what needs to happen in order for us to really succeed? And one of the findings relatively early on was that Accenture is brilliant and unstoppable when we bring the best of Accenture, which is complicated, to our clients. When we bring piece parts to clients, not so great. And so the way marketing had naturally evolved over time was more optimized towards selling the piece parts. And so what we're doing now is we are redefining our organization so that we are actually equipped to sell the differentiators. And so that was a fundamental realization early on that I got only by spending a lot of time with my peers trying to figure out where are the pain points in the business. Then the second part, I would say, of organizing complex organizations is having a group around you, a leadership team that you could trust with your life. And in fact, I have that. And it is certainly among my direct reports whom I would trust with my life, but also deeply into the organization on special projects that are very high visibility, very high intensity, very, very difficult. We recently lost our absolutely beloved CEO, Pierre Nanterme, and who had recently stepped down. And understanding what happens when someone of that importance to the organization steps down and then dies that's unprecedented. Very few people have ever had that experience. So pulling the right team together to do all that had to be done with military precision and with the right tone and manner globally was such a proof to me that I was surrounded by people I could trust with my own career, my own life, so to speak. And that really has been absolutely essential to build that level of strength, or to identify that you have that level of strength around you, and then to really leverage those people and those skills and those talents.
Got it. Yeah, especially the notion of that tight leadership group that you can trust with your life, so to speak, like you just said. I was on a virtual group that got together with Greg Welch recently. You may know him from Spencer Stewart. And we were talking about picking the team, the leadership team. And he used the analogy, I think he was leveraging from a CEO, but he didn't name the person, that they had this foxhole question. Right. They actually would ask all of his direct reports, who would you not want in the foxhole with you? And usually those people were the leadership people that were left the organization after that CEO would take over.
Wow.
So it's quite the dramatic first question from a new leader, but I thought it told a great story and highlights what you've just described, which is making sure you got the right people around you.
Yes, it's so fundamental, and it's nice to actually step back and reflect when you do have that, what a phenomenal lever it is. You can do practically anything when you have that wonderful esprit de corps and the right people with the right skills and, more importantly, the right motivation to work together. It is astonishing. There is nothing out of reach.
I mean, to your point, it makes everything easier. I mean, even communications, we're all global organizations, one-line communication can get misinterpreted pretty quickly. But if you've got that fundamental piece, most people just kind of intuitively know what you mean and what you need, and they take action. So
yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the areas I know that you is close to you and one that you're working on is the new view on how CMOs and fellow CMOs can lead companies on social issues. And in particular, maybe versus the CEO that may have taken those stands in the past. Can you give a little bit more context for other CMOs at other organizations, how you're thinking about that and maybe how it plays out at Accenture?
That's such a timely question, Alan. It used to be, even within recent years, that a marketer's number one question was, how do I prove out that the business is adding value? And that is switched to add something on top of it, which is, how can I demonstrate the values of the business on top of how the business is adding value? And that's not my opinion. That's proven out. Well, it is my opinion, but more to the point, it is proven out by any number of studies, from the Edelman Trust Barometer through research that we've conducted with Forrester, through research we're doing on our own. And so what has now become true of CMOs, and I think probably also chief communications officers where the role is split, is that demonstrating an organization or a company's credentials as a world citizen is now part of the brand. It's not a separate task that you would do as a responsible company. It's part of the brand. And in fact, we have a message house, as many do, for the brand, and it has 3 pillars, and one of them is responsible business. It's that fundamental. And we see it on not even simply stated importance from clients and prospects about how do you decide what consulting company to pick, but we see it on a regression analysis basis, which to me makes it all the more true. And we see that ethics and social behavior is one of the top 3 drivers of consideration for consulting organizations among our clients and our target clients. And that is amazing. I don't know that we would have seen that a handful of years ago. And so it does mean that any program that I'm thinking about and any overall brand argument that we're putting out into the marketplace must take stock of that and must deliver the answer to the question, okay, Accenture, what are your values?
Gotcha. And what are the types of, how does that play out at Accenture, in terms of campaigns or programs that you're thinking about or putting in place now?
Well, a couple of things. I'll just use 1 or 2 examples. And one is that what Accenture is extremely good at is doing the kind of analysis that builds business cases. And for long, there's been conventional wisdom that hiring people with disabilities made sense in terms of this ourselves as good world citizens. But we were able to partner with a couple of organizations and do the business case that demonstrated the value of hiring more people with disabilities. The companies would perform better because of it. And so we were able to take our chief spokesperson, who's also our chief legal counsel, who's terrific on this topic, and get him out talking about the business case and the value of hiring people with disabilities. And at one point when we launched it, he was on stage with Ted Kennedy Jr., and of course, that got tons of attention because it was finally delivering the numbers behind why do the right thing. Here are some numbers. And more recently, launched on International Women's Day, we were able to publish a piece of research that drew the link between cultures of equality and orientation of companies towards innovating. And innovation is the holy grail for probably everyone in business, let alone outside of business right now. But we were able, again, to draw quantitative links based on the work that we were doing. And there are a million other things that we're doing: tech for good initiatives, apprenticeship initiatives, many things on a local and global level. So we have a lot to talk about. And I feel spectacularly grateful that I'm at a place that has such an orientation and so much to talk about. And it's up to my team and me to figure out what is the most compelling way to get those ideas across in the marketplace.
I love the aspect that you're helping to build the business case, not only doing it, but you're building the business case for others to adopt those practices as well. That's fantastic. Not to keep drawing all these parallels, but it reminds me of I'm going to blank on his name, but the CEO of the Nature Conservancy and his ability to make an ROI argument for conserving land and the notion of conservancy.
That's terrific. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, he was a Goldman Sachs banker before becoming the CEO of the Nature Conservancy, which is also an interesting twist.
That's great background, actually, isn't it?
Right. But this notion of making a business case, I mean, I think it empowers others. So I like it in terms of what you're doing, and I'm not just blowing praise your way, but because it empowers others to adopt those same practices. So it's multiplying effect.
That's good to hear. And I'll take praise, Alan. No need to hold back on, I'm good with praise. So
yeah. All right. I'll keep it going. One of, and I believe you know this person as well, somebody that's been on the show before, Peter Horst, has written a book around, fake news and being able to take a stand. And that he talks quite a bit in the book and on the podcast about getting your values right as a company first, right? Before you can really go out into the marketplace. And I'm just curious, I mean, you're such a large organization. How does that manifest itself? Because I would imagine you've got the opinions of the United Nations under your umbrella. So it's not an easy task, I imagine.
Well, and Peter is terrific, by the way, so it's great to hear his name. It's a very interesting moment in time. And given in many markets so much polarization, what we have found is that there are fundamental values that we easily share. And then there are opinions on politics, which were inherently as polarized in all likelihood as the world around us. So what we have found is that this idea of what your values are and having values and being open about them is something that employees are actually demanding. And I think that's a sign of the times, that you don't push out values. Values are expected. And it's not simply from millennials. It is expected from millennials, but it's expected from every generation in the workplace. And what I recently learned from the Edelman Trust Barometer is that there is a very high degree of trust from employees to employers, as most institutions, nearly all globally, have been on a downward trend for many decades. That is the place where you still have trust. And so behaving in trustworthy ways is absolutely essential to be the talent magnet that I do believe we are. So we have, to make this way too long an answer, but back to that message house that we have about what our brand is all about, that has our client value proposition, it has responsible business. The middle pillar is all about our talent brand. And what the talent brand is all about is a global collective of diverse people innovating together. So the principles that we study around culture of equality and what that means are principles that we are living. And we talk about them a lot. And they have created an environment that, as we look at our own research, creates this culture of innovation, which is our promise to what we deliver to clients. So I'll stop there, but it's a really, really big topic area. And it's never been more relevant. I really don't think it's ever been more relevant in my lifetime in marketing.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And so let's talk about the talent brand, because I've heard that term before, but a lot of times it's a split conversation. It's partly an HR conversation and partly a marketing or communications conversation. Just curious, what goes into a talent brand from your perspective? And is there a reason why, marketing and marketing communications is driving that at Accenture?
Talent brand, we believe, is comprised of three things. It's the people you have and hire. It is the purpose of your organization overall, and it's the culture that you create. And very early on, I was in conversations with one of my colleagues who runs this enormous talent organization that we have at Accenture. And it became clear that we in marketing had not articulated the talent brand. And beyond that, because we are 467,000 plus people, our talent brand actually is our brand. There's no difference. And I think that's true of any professional services organization. Maybe less so in places that are less dependent on human talent, but that's what we are. We're all about human talent. And so what we did is we actually got a small group of people together and of leaders throughout the talent organization, but moderated by my team and me to walk through, okay, what is our talent brand? And it was an archaeological dig. It wasn't making it up. It was finding it and articulating it, so that all of the many, many programs, many of which are HR programs, some of which are brand programs, and a lot are recruiting programs, because we recruit tens of thousands of people a year. And so having a very compelling point of view to share with the people we're trying to hire, given that it is a competitive talent market, was really, really essential. And that's how it's working.
I love it. Well, you've mentioned now in a couple of examples, these bridges that you're building with your peers, and the CMO role, as you know, you live this every day. It's a very unique one. You've got to have the external market pulse of what's going on out in the marketplace with customers and clients and competitors, et cetera. You're building these internal bridges, whether it's around the things that you want to take a stand on as an organization, or whether it's the talent brand and the HR and culture groups. What do you see, or how would you describe the role of CMO in driving this collaboration? Because a lot of times, the many that I speak to, it feels like the role itself is the glue between a lot of different functions. And when you got a great collaborators inside your organization, it goes well. And when you don't, that's the source of pain, right? How do you see that, the role itself and its drive towards collaboration?
Well, we recently, as we always do, did some research and dubbed the CMO the Chief Collaboration Officer for all of the points that you just made, Alan. And my observation over time has been, it used to be that the CMO, the best friend of the CMO needed to be the CTO and the CIO as we got into the transformation of media consumption into a digital era. Now we would argue that we're in a post-digital era. And we, the CMO community, need to have new friends. And so some of those new best friends are head of talent or head of people in your organization. It would be the chief ethics officer. And in my case, the chief legal counsel is one of my best buddies, because we collaborate on what's going on with government relations and what's going on in ethics. So you need to keep your former friends, the CTO and CIO, because post-digital means digital is how we operate, not that it went away, but you add on the new friends, because the CMO, to your point, is well positioned to understand reactions from the outside world and constituents, but is one of the few areas in any organization that works and has a responsibility across the entire organization. And as things like responsible business and talent brand become more and more important, that leads to absolutely essential new relationships. And they are all collaborative. When they work well, they are highly collaborative.
Right. Is there any best practices you might recommend to, say, other CMOs, how to build those bridges? Maybe when you're new, or maybe, new to the role, or, it's the first time you've worked with the chief legal officer, as an example.
Being new to the role is a perfect starting point for a CMO, or new to the organization, because you have license to say, Tell me what you are thinking about. What are you worried about? What are the challenges of your function? Please give me comments about how you see my group working. And it really is the old-fashioned skill of relationship building and having the curiosity to both ask the questions and listen to the answers. And what I have found as I've taken new roles over time, that is the indispensable, absolute first step. And at one point, I think I was at Ogilvy, we were given a very cheesy desk, plaque. Incredibly corny, yet I still remember it many, many, many years later, it was in reference to clients, but I could replace client with peer colleagues. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I would say the version of that works for me now is people don't know how much you know until they know that you understand what they're all about and what they're trying to achieve. And that's really the only way to form the relationships which then equip you to do your job well.
That's said so well. I mean, it's empathy at the end of the day, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Really, really just putting yourself and not necessarily in someone else's shoes, but truly understanding that I love your thought about asking questions and listening to the answers. Right?
It's not going through the motions of asking the question. That's not the thing that works. It's actually getting the answers is the thing that arms you to then go forth and do good.
Right. Well, this has been good. Let's switch gears because I love to get to know the person behind, the role in the big company. And in that effort, I love asking this question to everybody that comes on lately. Is there an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
So my defining relationship as a child was with a remote island in upstate New York in the St. Lawrence River between Canada and the U.S. And I spent a lot of time, weekends and weeks in the summer, on this remote island with my family, which was totally off the power grid. So no electricity, no running water, very few, if any, creature comforts. And that was actually the defining influence. And of course, I never realized that until I was a full-grown adult and in the workplace. But it was how I've learned skills of resiliency and innovation, actually. It was through that experience.
Wow, that's quite amazing. And so was it planned? It was like a vacation? What?
Also, it was a strange and brilliant vision my parents had. My father used to fish in the St. Lawrence River, and there's a group of islands called the Thousand Islands. And yes, the salad dressing is named after them. And some of them have power and electricity in houses, but the one that my parents decided to buy, and they're rarely available, was in the middle of the river, and it had literally nothing. It had a long dock. And so they built an outhouse, and that was it for at least the first 10 years. And we lived outside of Syracuse, so we could easily get there on weekends, couple of hours away, jump in a boat that we kept on the mainland, and then camped. And so upstate New York is not known for sun. It's known for lots of rain. So camping in the rain. But I learned how to, fish, swim, build fires, sleep outside on rocks. And it was an ongoing lesson in responsibility, adaptability, and resilience from the time I was 6.
Wow. I love that. They need that camp now for adults.
They do. Yes.
Yes. Especially if there's no cell service too. Like, get me off the grid, please. Yeah.
I'm feeling withdrawal already just hearing that phrase.
Right. What advice, if you were doing this all over again, restarting your career at some place, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, so one thing I overlearned on the island was independence. And it wasn't until relatively recently, I have to confess, that I understood that asking for advice and coaching was not only okay, but it's a sign of strength. So for years upon years upon years, I thought I cannot possibly seek advice. It's a sign of weakness and not knowing what I was doing. And then midway through, I had a wonderful client, And she would routinely say, Amy, give me some coaching on this X, Y, or Z situation. And it was through that interaction that I realized, oh, wait, you can do that. You can do that. It doesn't say you don't know what you're doing. And now, at this advanced stage in my career, 30 plus years into the workplace, I readily go out and ask people, what do you think? What would you do? How would you advise me? What would you coach me to do? And if I had known that I can and should have been doing that, I think I would have avoided a lot of stress for quite a while. So that's the downside of being too self-sufficient, is failing to learn that lesson.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. That's great advice. Well, what fuels you? What keeps you going these days?
So I'm a big fan of curiosity. And so having things to be curious about, having a certain amount of uncertainty and change, which then fuels curiosity, has driven me all of these many years. I've got a low threshold for boredom, so I do seek experiences in the new. And in fact, one of the many book groups that I'm part of, I started a few years ago, and it's devoted to reading debut novels, just first novels, which is a leisure time manifestation of experiencing the new, is finding new voices and new modes and new views on the world. And then more concretely, I have a fabulous husband. I have two fabulous sons in their early 20s, and they are my absolute rocks. And so that's the long and the short of it.
No, that's great. That's great. I don't know how you have time to be a part of reading groups, but I'm envious.
I miss a lot of them, but I try.
Yeah. I like that. Well, stepping back from the job, and I know this is always a tricky question, especially for professional services folks, but marketers tend to be students of what's going on around them. So are there any brands or companies or causes that you follow or you think other people should be taking notice of?
Well, I think I'll answer. I'll take the cause out.
There you go.
And answer that one, Alan, which is I've been involved with one of the leading college access programs, which is called the Posse Foundation, for several years now as a writing coach, a career coach, and helping to select the Posse scholars. And I think this whole idea of college access and how to combat or how to handle socioeconomic diversity, among other forms of diversity, is very much of our moment. And any involvement on things like that, where you have the opportunity to actually make a lifelong impact, which then has future generational impact, is important right now. And there are other causes that are really, really important right now, but I would say that's the one that certainly in the United States is very much of the moment. And there's some recent scandals have been written about in which people who were already going to go to college based on their circumstances of birth and family situations were getting even more help that was not okay. So I am very interested in programs, well, a little bit like the apprenticeship programs that we do here at Accenture. Enlarge the experience of people and give more opportunities to more people who wouldn't have normally had them available.
That's great. That's great. And you hit on it kind of tangentially, an issue that oddly enough has come up, I don't know, probably half a dozen times on the podcast from marketers, from Phil Kotler, wrote the management marketing book that we all started with, right, in the 70s. Some, more recent people, which is this notion of the income inequality and socioeconomic instability that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
It's a big question, but it's funny. I mean, it's funny, not funny, I should say, that it's come up so many times on the podcast. So I agree.
That is, it's certainly a major factor of our time, but it's interesting that marketers are noting it in particular.
Yeah. And, luminaries, I would say. The other person that comes to mind that it did come up with was Seth Godin as well.
Yes.
And maybe it's because we're attuned to demand and obviously disposable incomes is a part of that if you're in the consumer business. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting.
Very true.
Interesting. Well, last question for you. What do you see the future of marketing looking like?
Our chief technology officer came out with a book about a year ago called Human and Machine, which discusses what you would think about. I think the future of marketing is captured by the title of his book, because the technical skills of how you reach people, how you measure your efficacy in doing so, are technical, and they're very real and very important. But the human part is not going away. And if anything, it is getting more important. And I'm a student of the value of a liberal arts education, having benefited from one. So I have an eagle eye on other people saying the same thing. And there are more people talking about the value of a curriculum that would teach you how to communicate, how to talk, importantly, how to write, when you consider how much is conducted in writing, non-face-to-face, how you interact, how you express yourself, all of these items. The more technical we become, the more important the human element becomes. And I think that is the future of marketing, is marriage of both.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate you having me. And thank you for your extremely thoughtful questions. I really enjoyed it.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.